Hello, today we'll be covering the step-by-step creation of an entire enemy here in Godot. We will be creating this frog enemy who can move towards the player as well as move at random when the player dies, and can also deal damage and take damage to and from the player, along with creating a semi-advanced animation handler that makes this frog look amazing. So let's get started and cover lots about the creation of enemies in Godot 4. This is part 6 of the tutorial series where we will be creating this exact hack and slash game step-by-step in Godot 4. If you have any questions regarding errors, understanding, or anything at all, then please let me know in the comments and I'll be sure to get back to you. Remember that this course is completely free, but if you want to help support me a little more, then a link to my Patreon page will be in the description below. Your support truly means the world. Thanks, and remember to subscribe and drop a like to help YouTube push this tutorial and this entire series to more aspiring game developers. And now let's begin. Okay, so to get started, we're going to create the frog scene. So to do that, we're going to go up here to this little plus button and we're going to click on a brand new scene. And this, we're going to do another node, which is going to be a character body 2D. Now, this character body 2D that we're going to use is going to be our toxic frog, because that is the name of our enemy here. It's going to be a toxic frog, and then we're going to have a couple things that we have to get made up here in our scene that are going to allow us to get started with the actual creation and the coding and the implementing of this enemy. First off, being an animated sprite 2D, and this is mainly the long and boring part that's going to take just a second, maybe about a minute, to create all of the animations. So I'm going to walk you through them. So we're going to end up having an idle animation. Now, I'm not going to say that we're going to use all these, but I am going to tell you how to implement all of these into your game. So we can say we're going to use, I think, 4 of them. We're going to end up using 4 of the animations. I think the only one we're not going to use is idle, but I'll explain how you can implement that. So we're going to use the frog enemy, purple, blue, and we're going to use this big sprite sheet here, which is going to be 5 vertical and is going to be 9 horizontal, or maybe it's, yeah, okay, it looks like it's 9 horizontal there. And then this top one is going to be the idle animation. We're just going to click on all these in order. It's going to be 7, which is actually going to be 8 frames there. And then we can say, okay, let's make it 5 frames a second, and we want it to loop. That is good. Create a new animation. The next one will be our walking animation, which I'm doing this in the order to make it the easiest for us to go about this, because the walking is going to be this one here. And then the next one we're going to make is this one. The next one we're going to make is this one. And then we're going to keep going down. So that's going to be this one here. Walk, we're going to also leave it at 5 frames a second. We're going to create a new animation. This is going to be our deal damage animation. Our deal damage animation is going to end up being our 3rd row here, which is going to consist of 6 frames. And then our deal damage animation, we're also going to make it 6 frames a second, so it's 1 second long, the entire animation. We're going to end up having a hurt animation here. This hurt animation is only going to be 4 frames a second, and it's going to be this one there. So make sure those are in order. And then we're going to create one more animation, which is going to be our death animation, which our death animation is going to be a pretty good amount of frames, because it's going to fizzle out into a little dust particle there. So we can add in all of these frames here. It's going to end up being 9 frames. And then we're going to make our death animation about 8 frames a second, just so it's a little under a second. So whenever we are creating our input, it's going to look good, right? So it's going to end up signaling that the player has died, and then we're going to end up playing our full animation, and that's going to make more sense when we go over that. But now let's just begin with creating our movement. After we go over a couple more things, let's go over our collision shape. So our collision shape is going to just be a simple circle here, and we can make it about a little less than the size of our frog. Make sure it's centered up, because remember, this frog is going to flip across the line here, so sometimes it's going to be facing this way, and the head of it is going to end up being about right here. So make sure this is on the middle line somewhere. We'll leave it about right there. That looks perfect for our collision shape. And then we're also going to end up adding in a timer, because when we do create our random direction, we're going to end up using a timer to decide when or what the direction is, right? So whenever this timer times out, and then some basic settings are going to be 1 second, and we're going to have it auto start. And now we're going to go over how to use this direction timer and how we're going to end up using it in the next chapter, where we go over randomized movement. So let's move into that now. So randomized movement, how are we going to go about this? Well, we're going to go to our toxic frog, and we're going to create a toxic frog script. Now this script is going to be remove all of this, because we're going to start from scratch. I'm going to zoom in pretty good. So we're going to start off, whoops, okay, so it kind of bugged out on me, but we're going to start off with a class name. Now the class name for our frog is going to just be our frog enemy, and this is so we can access it later within our player script. And then there are a couple variables that I do want to go over, like our constants, which are going to be our speed variable, which we can set it to 10, and we can always come back and change this later. And then we're going to have a set of health variables. So we're going to have health, which is going to be 80, and then we're also going to have max health, which we're not going to end up using in this exact tutorial, but we're going to use it when we create health bars. So we can say, okay, health max is going to be 80, and then var health min is going to be equal to 0, of course. We can save the scene in the scenes folder, Control S. And then also up here under our speed, I want to end up adding in another variable because it's kind of related to our speed. It's going to be our var is frog chase. So this variable here, if it's equal to true, that means our frog is going to be chasing our player. If it's equal to false, that means we are not going to be chasing the player, and we're going to be like moving around random, which is going to be the movement that we're going to be creating here, right? And then we're also going to have some other variables. One is going to be the dead variable, which is going to be a bool, and then alpha start, we can set that to false. And then we can say, okay, var taking damage. So basically, is our frog taking damage? Because if we're taking damage, then we're going to want to stop some of the other animations from playing, so we're not overlapping animations, right? So we can say, okay, taking damage bool, and then alpha spawn, we can equal that to false. And then we can say, okay, how much do we want our how much damage do we want our frog to deal? Well, we'll say 20 because we want our frog to deal 20 damage, and we actually want our bat to deal 10 damage. So let me go over here and change this, because in a previous episode, we set our bat's health to 20. So let's make sure we set that to 10 so they're different. So at the very end of the video, we can kind of see a difference in it. And then we can say, okay, var is dealing damage. So this is kind of going to be the same as our taking damage variable here, because if we're dealing damage, then we want to play certain animations and we don't want to play other animations, right? So we can say, okay, we'll deal damage, and then this is going to also be equal to a bool, and at the start of the game it's going to be equal to false. Then we're going to have a direction variable. This direction variable here is going to be just a vector 2, right? So we can say, okay, var direct, which is going to be a vector 2, and we'll end up setting this later in the script. We're going to have another constant, which is not going to be Godot's gravity, but it's going to be our custom gravity that we are using for this game, which is 900. And then we're going to say, okay, var our knockback force. So remember, whenever our enemy, so really we should be coming back up here and doing it, but I think it's better to go over everything now, and then whenever we're in the script, I'll come back up to the variables and I'll say, okay, so this is where this is going to come into play, and it's going to make a lot more sense, right? So, okay, so we're going to have a variable which is going to be a knockback force. So this knockback force is going to be whenever our frog gets hurt, right? So our frog is going to end up getting hurt, and then we're going to want to knock it back, and that's going to be the force. We can always come back and change it. And then we're going to have one more, which is going to be var is roaming. And this one here is going to be confusing now, because you're going to be like, why would we need that? But it's going to make a lot of sense whenever our player dies, because our frog is going to be roaming all of the time. But when it dies, we're going to say, okay, if dead and is roaming. So if we're dead and we're still roaming, then we want to stop roaming and we want to play the death animation and everything, right? So we don't loop the death animation over and over and over. But the first thing I want to get started with is our randomized movement, right? So we can go up to our direction timer, and then we can signal from our node a timeout to our toxic frog script here. And then here in this function, we can set some stuff. So first of all, we want to change our wait time. So it's a random wait time, so the movement of our frog looks a little bit more randomized. So to do that, we can say, okay, well, direction timer, right? We can get our direction timer, and then we can set our wait time to a random variable between whatever it may be. So maybe we want it to equal 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds, or 2.5 seconds, right? And to do that, we're going to end up creating our own function, which is going to be a choose function, right? And it's just going to be a logic function that's going to choose between the numbers that we input. So we can say, okay, 1.5, 2, and 2.5. And then it's going to give us an error because this function does not exist. But if we create this and then we say, okay, an array is going to be passed through, then we can say, okay, array dot shuffle it. So then we basically shuffle these all up. So we're going to end up maybe 2.5 is going to be in the front, right? Well, for this case, it might be, and then we'll just say, okay, well, let's return whatever the front of this randomly shuffled list is. It's like shuffling a deck of cards. There's always going to be, or maybe it's a random chance that one of these will be in the front, one of these will be in the back, one of these will be in the middle, right? Because it's going to shuffle them. And then we're just going to choose whatever ends up in the front, and then we're going to return that. So then the wait time is going to be equal to whatever is shuffled from here and is returned, right? And then we're going to say, okay, well, let's check if we're not in frog chase. So if the frog chase is equal to false, that means we're not chasing the player. That means we want to choose a random direction. So we can say, okay, direction that choose, which we're going to end up using our same array down here, our same function that we just created, and we can say vector2 dot right, and we can change or decide from vector2 dot left. So we're either going to choose left or right now, right? And then whenever we're changing directions, we want velocity to equal to 0, velocity.x to equal to 0, because if not, then it's going to end up sliding as it's deciding, and it's going to look a little funky. So we can do that. Now we're going to go into creating the movement for our actual frog. So once we do this, then we'll have movement, and we can test play it, and we can see our movement. So we can say, okay, process delta, and then we can say if we are not on the floor, then we want to apply our gravity, right? So if we're not on the floor, we're getting some sort of error here because we have 2 colons back there. But if we're not on the floor, then we want our velocity to equal to our gravity, right? So we want our velocity.y to plus equal our gravity, and then we can times that by our delta. And then we want our velocity.x to equal to 0, so our frog can't move side to side when he's in the air. He can only move up and down. So if he somehow ends up in the air, I don't even know how he'll end up in the air because he has nothing that's going to make him end up in the air. But if he does somehow end up in the air, then what is going to happen is he's going to fall straight down, and he's not going to move like at an angle towards the ground. So that's what that there is going to do. And then we're going to call our move function, which is what we're going to create now. And then we can pass through delta to our move function there. Then we can create this move function. This is going to be the bulk of our entire code, right? For now, it's going to be very, very simple, as it's only going to be like maybe a couple lines of code. But we can say, okay, so if we're not dead, if our frog is not dead, and if our frog chase is not or if our frog chase is equal to false, which means we're moving in a random direction, then we can say, okay, is frog chase. So if we're not in frog chase, then we can say velocity plus equals direction times speed times delta. So basically we're going to grab the random direction that we chose down here, and then we're also going to up here at the top take our speed, multiply those together, and then we can set is roaming variable to true because our frog is roaming the map, so that is going to be equal to true. And then we can say basically that is what we're going to want to do here, right? Okay, so and then I guess at the end we can say, okay, well, else if dead, then we want velocity dot y to still equal, we want velocity.y to still move down, but we want velocity.x to equal to 0 so we don't slide along the ground, right? Okay, so if we go to our stage level and we implement our frog over here, so we can say, okay, we want to do our toxic frog, and we want to implement this into our scene here. Make sure we put this in front of this first so we can move it and then put it behind it. Okay, but behind our scene transition, that is, because or else whenever we transition scenes and the frog is still in the scene, then the frog's going to show over the top, so the frog's not going to fade out. But if we do click play now, you're going to see the frog's going to be stuck, which is because, let's see. So somewhere, okay, so if not on the floor, so if we're not on the floor, then velocity.y plus equals, okay, so we never have a move and slide. That is a problem. So up here in our process, we need to say move and slide. Just like that, move and slide, and then if we click play, everything should come together. Our frog falls. He's going to end up moving right now. Now he's going to move left. The animations, of course, aren't going to work, but you can kind of see that he is moving at a completely random rate in random directions, and that looks pretty good, right? So our player is about to die. He's at 40 health if you look in the output, but our frog's moving around random. Okay, so that looks good. So we can pump up the speed maybe if we wanted to move a little faster. For now, I'm just going to leave it because everything is working, and that looks good. So up here, frog chase, that is, if we equal this to false and we go back to our stage level, that's truly how it's going to end up working. But we are working anyway because we never set it, so it's equal to null, which is still equal to false, right? So okay, now we're going to end up moving into where we create our animation handler so we can actually handle some animations so we know what's going on our actual game. So to do that, we're going to go up here under our move animation, and we're going to create the handle animation. And in our handle animation, we're going to create a new function. We'll make this under the move function here, and we'll say function. Also, if you want to see this code, maybe you want to see all this code and copy it down. So basically what we have up here at the top is we're going to have a class name, some variables. You can pause the video and copy these down. We have our process function here. We have our move function here. And we have a direction and a choose, and now we're creating our handle animation function. So, okay, this is going to be the biggest function that we have in our code so far. So, okay, handle animation. It's going to be blank for now, but what we're going to end up adding is we're first going to get our animated sprite in some sort of variable. So we can say, okay, var animated sprite is going to be equal to our animated sprite 2D that we have, and then we can say, okay, well, what's the first type of animation that we're going to have? What's the most basic? That's going to be the walk, right? So what do we need to be true to play walk? Well, first of all, we can't be dead, and we cannot be taking damage, right? And we also cannot be dealing damage, right? So if all those are somehow equal to true, so we're not taking damage, we're not dealing damage, and we're not dead, then we want our animated sprite here to end up playing our walk animation that we created. And then here is where we will flip the animation if need be. So we can say, okay, if direction.x is equal to -1, then we want our animated sprite dot flip h to equal true, because that means we'd be facing left. And basically else if direction.x is equal to +1, then we want our animated sprite dot flip h to equal to false, right? So now our animation should play a walking animation, and we should flip based on what happens. So if we click on our stage level, we click play, you're going to see he's going to play some sort of walking animation. He's moving so slow, so his speed is so slow, that's why the animation ends up looking funny. But you can kind of see he plays that animation when we need to play that animation. Okay, but we're going to have more animations that we need to play, of course. So the next couple animations that we're going to have are going to be, we're going to have a hurt animation, and we're going to end up having a death animation. And we're going to have an attack animation, but we're going to create the attack animation at the very end of this video, because there's a special way that I want to go about implementing it. So we can say, okay, else if we're not dead and we are taking damage, so we are taking damage and we are not dealing damage, then we basically want animated sprite here. We want our animated sprite here to play our hurt animation, just like that. And then we want to set an await tree, which is going to be a timer here. So we can say, okay, await dot create timer, which is going to be about however long our hurt animation is. So our hurt animation here lasts 0.8 of a second, because we have 4 frames and we're moving at 5 frames a second. So it's going to last 0.8 of a second. So we can say, okay, well, we want this timer to last 0.8 of a second. Then we want to time out. Then we want to say, okay, taking damage is going to equal to false, right? Because if we are here and we are playing our hurt animation, then we're going to say taking damage. And then the reason we create this timer is because at the end of our hurt animation, we're going to say taking damage equals true, because if is equal to false, so that we don't keep playing our animation over and over and over, and we don't keep looping that animation, right? So basically what this is going to do is it's going to play our hurt animation, and then we're going to end up changing this to true up in our code later on, right? And we'll go over that whenever we basically handle our take damage animation. So we're going to end up handling a take damage animation for whenever our player damages our frog, and then that's where we're going to say, okay, taking damage is equal to true. Then basically somewhere in our code we're going to need to change that to false, so that our enemy can take damage again, right? So it's going to make more sense when it all comes together at the very end. And I'll walk you through the entire script once we completely finish, and I'll basically go step by step how everything is working, right? But okay, so that is how that's going to work. Now we're going to have one more animation, one more main animation, I guess that is. We're going to end up creating one later, but right now we're going to say else if we are dead and we are still roaming around the map, then we want to say, okay, well, if we're still roaming around the map and we're dead, that's a no-no. So we want to say, okay, is roaming is equal to true. And then basically is equal to false, because we don't want to be roaming anymore. Basically what that's going to do is that's going to stop our movement animation throughout this code, right? Later on, that's going to end up stopping our movement animation, and then that's going to trigger our entire code, right? And then so now we're going to know, okay, well, the player is dead, and that's also what that is going to do, is that's going to stop looping this, because if we're not dead, and then if this is the only one that's dead and dead is equal to true, that means we can only somehow go into this one, right? This is the only one that's possible to go into. But then if roaming is equal to false, right, like it is, because we just said it, so it can only play this here one time. If it's equal to false, then it's not going to be able to play it again, and it's not going to end up looping the animation that we're about to play. So we can say, okay, sprite dot play death animation there, and then we can say, okay, await timer. So we can say we're going to create another timer just so we give our animation time to finish playing before we queue free it. And we can say, okay, 1, and then we can say dot timeout, just like that. And then we can say, okay, handle death animation, or handle our death, and then this is going to be a separate function. We can say function handle death, just like that. And in here, this is where you're going to end up adding points or just handle, like if you want to add points to your total score, this is where you would do it. This is where you would queue free it. This is where you would do all the things that you need to happen in your game whenever your enemy dies. This is where you would handle that. For us, it's going to be very simple. We're not going to have very much happen. We're just going to make it disappear from the map, right? So we can say, okay, queue free, just like that. So really, we could just put this line of code here, but this is just in case you wanted it for your own game, and this is how you would go about adding in everything that happens when your player ends up dying. So now we have a frog enemy. If we go to our stage level and click play, and it's going to move around in random directions, and it's going to play our animations. We need to turn up the speed a little bit, but you can kind of see that it's going to choose random directions to move in. It looks pretty good. It doesn't care about where our player's at, and that looks good. So you can kind of see how it moved right multiple times there. So it's not just moving right, left, right, left, right, left. It could be right, 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 left, left, right, right, left, left, and then our player ended up dying there. But that looks good. So our frog is looking good. Now what I want to go do is I want to add in our player chase. So to chase our player, we're going to have to create a separate movement within our movement animation. So up here, we're going to say, okay, well, if is frog chase, then what do we want to happen? Or if is being hurt, how are we going to implement the knockback? And that's what we're going to go over now. So there are a couple things that we need to go over first. Up here, we're going to create two more variables, which are going to be, one's going to be for our player. So we can say, okay, var player, what is our player? Where is our player? And our player is going to be a character body 2D, just like this. And then our var player in area is going to, for now, be equal to false. We may use this and we may not. We'll decide. We'll see here in just a minute how everything looks when we come together. But we're going to say, okay, well, in our move function, what do we want to happen? So we're going to have, where's our move? So here's our move function. What do we want to happen? Well, this is if we're not chasing the frog. So if we're not chasing the frog, that's fine. That's exactly what we want to happen. But else if we are in frog chase and we are not taking damage, because we're going to have another one, which is going to be if we are in frog chase and we are taking damage, then we want to play our knockback. But if I guess we would do it either way. So, but really the frog would never be in player chase. I mean, the frog would never be roaming around the map idly unless the player's alive. So that would never really occur. But we'll probably implement that in as well, but I'll talk about that here in just a second. So okay, so we have else if we're in frog chase and we are taking damage, so we are not taking damage. So if we're in frog chase and we're not taking damage, then we want to basically get our movement towards the player. And how are we going to get our movement towards the player? Well, we have to say, okay, direction to player is going to equal the position dot direction to our player dot position, and then times by whatever we want our speed to be. So we can either times this up here by our speed, which is what we're going to end up doing. So I'm going to increase our speed because we were talking about that a little while ago about increasing that. And then over here we can say, okay, let's times it by our speed, right? Just like that. And then let me zoom out so you can see, but times it by our speed. And then we can say, okay, well, we're not going to create any movement doing that, right? Because that's a variable. Well, we can say, okay, velocity.x is going to be equal to direction to player.x. And what this is going to do is stop the frog from flying up in the air and doing like just going up in the air. If our player was to jump, our frog's not going to try and go up to get the player anymore. If we just make sure it only moves on the x-axis there. If we go to our stage level, we come up here to the top and we say, okay, frog chase, we want it to equal to true. What is going to happen now? Well, if we click play, you're going to see that we're going to have an error, and that is because position is on base null. So right here, I'm guessing it's this position because we never got our player. So we can go up here into our process function and we can just say something very, very simple, like change our player variable to equal global.player body, which is a global script that we have over here in our global scene, which is going to be player body, character body 2D, and we set that within our, this is our player script here. We set that within our player script there. So now if we were to go to our stage scene and we were to click play, what's going to end up happening is the frog's going to end up chasing the player. But what you are going to see is that our frog never switches directions. He moves towards our player, he looks great, but he never switches directions left or right. He always faces towards the right, which of course is not good at all, because we are never, and I'll tell you why this is. So basically why this is because we're never updating our direction. The only time we ever update our direction in this entire game, because up here we're not using our direction to move. So we have to update our direction to correlate with this script here, right? And because our direction is only being updated whenever we are not in frog chase. And that's why it's not updating our direction to be moving based on which way our frog is actually facing. So to fix that, we can say, okay, direction.x is going to be the absolute of velocity.x divided by velocity.x. And what this is going to do is, let's say velocity.x is equal to 30 positive. Well, if we were to get the absolute of 30 positive, it's going to be 30 positive divided by itself is going to equal to 1, right? But if we have, let's say we have negative 30, well, the absolute of negative 30, at negative 30 velocity x, then we're going to end up we're going to move in the left direction. Well, we can say, okay, let's get the absolute of that, which is going to be 30. Let's divide it by itself, which is going to be negative 30, and that's going to end up equaling negative 1, right? So that looks good. So the way we can do this is direction.x is going to be the absolute of velocity.x, and then divided by just velocity.x, just like that, right? Okay, so if we were to click play, this should come together and it should look great, and our frog is going to end up chasing our player, and it's going to flip whenever we pass the other way on our frog, and the frog is going to move towards us, and he looks pretty good, right? So that looks good. I really like how that looks. So now let's say if we hit our frog here, which we can't do because we don't really have anything for, you know, collision shapes or anything, so we can't really hit our frog, but our frog can't deal damage, so that's what we're going to go over now. But I want to go over one more thing, which is going to be here in our movement, so we don't have to come back up to our movement in the next clip where we go over the frog hitbox and stuff, so we can basically implement this in very quickly. But what I'm going to explain it now. So okay, if we're taking damage, right, if our frog is taking damage, what do we want to happen? Well, we want to play some sort of knockback. So to do this, we can say, okay, var knockback, we have to get the knockback direction, just so like up here where we got direction to player, we have to set our knockback direction. It's basically going to be opposite of our direction to player. So we can say, okay, knockback direction is going to equal the position dot direction to player dot position, and then basically we can say, okay, well, knockback is going to be times our knockback force. And now that I'm looking at this, our knockback force is going to be something completely different than what we set it to. It's going to be negative something. So we can say negative 20, right? It has to be negative for it to go the opposite way. But by knockback force, and then we can say, okay, velocity.x is going to equal our knockback force there, or it's going to equal our knockback direction there, direction.x as well. So it's going to equal our knockback direction. And then if we go and we click play, nothing's going to end up happening because we haven't implemented this in. So let's do that now. So now we're going to move into how is our frog going to take damage, and this is actually going to be pretty simple, and it's going to be pretty quick. So to do that, we can go to our 2D version, come over here, and we can say, okay, let's add in an area 2D to our frog. Let's name this our frog hitbox, and then for our frog hitbox, let's add in a collision shape 2D. This collision shape 2D is going to end up being it's going to end up being a circle here. And this hitbox is going to be basically, it's going to see where our player is and if our player hits our frog. So we want it to be pretty kind of small, but not too small, but something like this, I guess. We can do it maybe a little bit up like this, right? Make sure it's in line, and then kind of centered with the frog like that. And then that's going to be our frog hitbox, which is going to be the bigger one here. Then we can go to our frog hitbox, and then we can say, okay, let's send a signal to our script from an area entered to our toxic frog here. And then basically what we want to happen within this script is we want to get the damage from our player. So we can say, okay, var damage is going to equal the global dot player damage amount. And the reason we have this variable here is because our player down here can set multiple different damage amounts for whatever attack type he is doing. And if you want to learn all this, then it's going to be in a combat video that is in this series. So check out the playlist, which is linked below. But if we go to our toxic frog, we can say, okay, amount, right? And then we can say if area is equal to our global dot player damage zone, right? Which we created in a previous episode, which is our player's damage zone, which is the zone that, okay, so we didn't put a sign here and then pass, but this is a zone that our player has on his weapon, or that has on his character that deals damage. And then we can say, okay, if that's true, then we want to take damage, right? So we can say, okay, take damage, and we want damage to be the damage, right? And then we can say function take damage, just like that. And then here in the script, this is basically where we're going to deal with the health. So we can say health minus equals our damage. Then we can say taking damage is going to equal to true. Then we can check if our player is dead now. So we can do something very, very simple by just going, okay, and saying if health is less than or equal to 0, or I guess we can do min, we can do health min, right? Then we want health to equal health min, which means we want it to equal our minimum health here. And then we're going to want to say, okay, dead is going to equal to true. And then we're going to, just for testing, we can print a little test line here, which is going to say, okay, well, what frog got hit and what is their current health and everything like that, right? So we can say, okay, well, this is current health is and whatever health is, right? Just like that. Okay, so now if we play it, you're going to see that we're going to have health for our frog. If we hit it, you're going to see down here in the output, we're doing damage, and we're doing different amount of damage for whatever attack we may be having, right? So you're going to see the frog died. He played his death animation, and it looked very, very good. So the bats are in the way, which is kind of annoying. But if we take this guy out quick, let's play some different animations in here, just so we can see. And you're going to see he does that little death animation, and he looks great. But you can see, okay, character body frog. This is the toxic frog here. You can see 72, blah, 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 and he goes all the way down. Right here, we hit him for 8. Right here, we ended up hitting him for over 16 because he has 16. Right, so we hit him for different amounts each time based on whatever attack I was doing with whatever different button I was clicking, right? Okay, that works. Now I want to go over how the toxic frog is going to end up dealing damage, right? So he's going to deal damage in kind of the same way, but a very different way, because the way our player takes damage, the enemies don't deal damage, if that makes sense. It'll make sense when we go over it. Okay, but area 2D, we're going to say, okay, frog deal damage area. And then here we're going to end up having a collision shape. And this collision shape is going to be a circle. And this is going to be our deal damage zone. Just like this. We want it a little bit bigger than our last one. So if our player ends up entering this area, then he's going to get damaged. But that looks good. That's fine for now. And then we're going to say, okay, well, let's go to our global script, because we need to create a global variable. And we need to assign this to the frog, or to the global variable in the scripts. And I'll explain why this is and why we're not going to end up using signals for this. But you can kind of see here, we have a var damage zone and var damage amount for our bat. We're going to end up creating the exact same thing here. But we're going to say frog damage zone, which is going to be an area 2D. And we're going to say var frog damage amount, right? Because remember, our frog and our bat do different damages, right? Okay, so then we can go back to our frog. And we can go up here to the process function. And in this process function, we're going to set some more variables. We're going to say, okay, well, global dot frog damage amount is going to equal that of our damage to deal. And then we're going to say global dot our frog damage zone is going to, well, damage zone is going to equal our frog deal damage area, right? Just like that. Okay, that looks good. Right, that looks good. And then we're going to now go into our player. So in our player script, we have a function down here, which is our check hitbox, right? So this is our check hitbox, and you're gonna see right here how we go. Well, if the hitbox.getParent, so right here we're gonna get all the overlapping bodies, and then we're going to check whatever overlapping body is in the very, very front, right? So we're going to check the very front one, because we don't want to take damage from all these different things at once. We're going to take one at a time so we don't break the game. So we can say, okay, our hitbox areas, we're going to take whatever's in the front, and then we're going to take damage from that. If hitbox.getParent is bat enemy, which is the class name, then we're going to deal the damage of our bat. But if the hitbox dot, all right, I guess we can do else if. We can do else if hitbox.getParent is our frog enemy, right, which is our class name that we just created. And we can say damage, or we created at the beginning of this tutorial, damage equals global dot frog damage amount, right? So we're going to end up dealing 20 damage here if it's a frog, and we're going to end up dealing 10 damage here if it is a bat. So we can say, okay, hitbox, that looks good, right? And then let's play. So now we should be able to take damage from our frog. If our frog comes at us, you're going to see our player health does go down. We go to 80, we go to 60, but if we get hit by a frog, if we get hit by bat, we only go down by 10. Bat, we only go down by 10. If we get hit by a frog, we're going to end up going down by 20. The frog can kill us, which looks good. And then we can now kill the frog if we can go fast enough. Looks good. But what you may be noticing, oh, well, we're not playing the hurt animation. And that is true. So we are not playing the hurt animation. And let's make sure we are getting knocked back when we hit the frog. I don't think I saw that. Okay, so we are getting a knockback. As you can see, we are getting that knockback every time we hit the frog, which looks good. Okay, so that looks good. And we are playing the hurt animation. I don't know why I thought we weren't playing the hurt animation, but it looks like we are. So that looks good. I guess I thought we were having some sort of error because I didn't see it in the last time, but that I must have been mistaken. So that looks good. Okay, but what I do want to add is I want to add the attack animation for our frog, and I want to go through that very, very quickly here. But we can basically say, okay, well, let's go to our global script, and let's say for our player here, let's say var player hitbox is going to be equal to a area 2D. And I'm going to move through this super quick, but if we go to our player scene, we can go up here to our process, and we can say global dot hitbox is going to equal our player hitbox, just like that. Then we can go into our toxic frog. We can send in a signal from our damage area here. This is going to be a area entered to our toxic frog node. And then we can say, okay, well, if the area is equal to the global dot player hitbox, then we can say is dealing damage is equal to true. And we can say, okay, well, let's set a timer. Let's make it wait for 1 second so that we can't, just spam the animation over and over. Get tree dot create timer 1 second and dot timeout. And then once that timeout happens, then we can say is dealing damage is going to be equal to false, just like that. And then we're going to have to go and make sure that we have our deal damage animation. So if we go to our handle animation function up here, at the very bottom of all this, we can say else if we're not dead and we are dealing damage, then what do we want to happen? Well, we want our animated sprite to play our deal damage, just like that. And then we go to our stage level, we click play. You're going to see that our frog does chase our player. We do play. Look, you saw that animation there. See if we can get it to play again. Oh, you got it again. So he triggered. See, he triggered again. And he only triggers whenever he hits our player. So every time he's going to trigger that animation, we're going to end up getting hit by it. And there we go. We died. But if we were actually playing, we take him out. And you can kind of see that little fade back he does. If we kill him, he's going to blow up like a little balloon bubble. We can take out these guys as well. And if you want to go over and see a video on how to create these bat enemies here, then that is going to be part of this series as well. I think it's the 3rd episode where we go over enemy or flying enemies, which is a very, very good video as well. It goes over a lot of enemy movement and stuff like that to know. And this looks very, very good. So one more thing that I do want to go over is I want to go over in our toxic frog. This isn't really part of the video, but this is just for modular functions. So if we say, basically this is going to say, okay, well, if global dot player alive is equal to true, then we want is frog chase equal to true. So that means we don't have to manually set it. So basically if our player is alive, then we're going to be chasing our player. If our player here is dot player is not alive, then we want our frog chase to be equal to false. And that's not really going to make a change in our game, but that is going to make a pretty big change, because if our player dies, then we're going to end up moving around randomly, and that's going to look good. So I want to thank you for watching. I hope this video was able to help you in some way kind of cover how to create ground enemies or platform enemies here in Godot. As you can kind of see with this frog, he's attacking, we can hit him back, and he's attacking us pretty good right now, but he follows us. Every time we hit him, he has some little fade back if we do, or if we manage to hit him, right? So sometimes we aren't managing to hit him, but there we go, we got him. And that is how you kind of create an enemy. I hope this video was able to help in some way. If you have any questions on anything at all in this video, then let me know and I'll be sure to get back to you. But thank you so much for watching. And until next time, stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your day. Remember, next time we're going to be going over how to create a wave system so that we're going to be able to spawn these enemies into our game, and it's going to be pretty complex. But thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you next time. Until then, stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.